there's this sense of judgment that we're already walking into. Like I said, sometimes it's like we impose ourselves with those turn or burn type evangelism, or even we hear all these negative stories of pastors and things like that. We're kind of like this timid person in the corner saying, hey, like, we're not all bad ourselves, you know? Like, we're not all like this. Like, can I just have the chance to have this conversation with you? And I think that's real. That's super real.
This is officially our first podcast of the new year, 2025.
This is crazy.
The day of recording is January 2nd, 2025. How's your year going so far, Drew?
You know, it's been phenomenal. The only really big things I've done in 2025 is watch movies and do a puzzle with my wife.
Oh, yeah?
It's been absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Wives can be a puzzle, Drew.
Yeah, they can, but it's a beautiful masterpiece.
It is a beautiful masterpiece. Yeah. It's almost like when two people
become one masterpiece. Is there a book out there about that?
There will be, but we're not going to give that away right now. So we are back. Theology Threads. Hello, everybody. Dr. Brian Jenkins with?
I am Drew Robertson.
You are Drew Robertson.
I don't really have a title, I guess.
You do. Well, what is your title here?
I guess
your communications
I'm the
director?
communications director, yes.
For New Life Church.
For New Life Church.
Friend of the podcast.
Friend of the podcast.
Wife of the original superfan.
Yes.
I'm sorry, your wife is the original. You are not her wife.
No, my wife is actually
the original superfan.
Yeah. So I think if I could always make her coffee in the morning in her do the work mug, that is a win in and of itself.
And yet, knowing we were recording today, knowing she's on her break, you did not invite her to participate today.
I actually did. But, you know, she's trying to soak in every last minute of vacation as she can.
That's fair, because we record not too far from her workplace.
Yes.
And so I can appreciate that.
Yes, she's not working today. She's actually doing her puzzle.
So. There you go. All right. Well, we are talking today. So season 2, by the way, thanks for joining us.
Yes.
Like, click, subscribe, share with your friends, all that kind of stuff. Season 3 that we're on right now has really kind of been a journey of like stuff worth talking about, right? And we call them doctrines, but they're really just some ideas within Christianity that, hey, where does that come from? Why do we have to do it? What is the Bible? And it goes really back to the heart of the season 1 heart, which is what does the Bible really say?
Right, yeah.
And one that came up, and it comes up, and I don't have my wad of papers that have the I printed out all of the requested episode ideas,
and you wad them up on paper.
I have them in a
wand.
I have them in my original sheet of paper.
Wow!
And I keep them with me. I don't have they're in my bag, but one of them really does talk about, like, how can I talk about Jesus to my neighbors, my friends, my family members in a reasonable way, or some of the questions that come up will express things like, I'm worried about my friends. How can I get them to understand how much Jesus means to me? That kind of stuff. And so what I wanted to do, interestingly enough, and what we talked about doing was really talk about that idea of, depending on what generation you belong to, there's all sorts of words for it, right? So I've heard it as witnessing, evangelism, soul winning. I don't know if you know with that one.
I've heard that once before. Yes. Testifying.
Soul winning, testifying. Where does apologetics, which is very popular on like TikTok and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff. So really it comes down to the issue of sharing our faith, sharing what it means to share our faith, why we do it, why we want to do it. And I think just from a perception-wise and really from a data point, analytics-wise, where that has happened in the role of church culture.
Right.
Because it doesn't, for lack of a better term, it doesn't seem to be a thing.
Yeah, no, you and I were talking a little bit about this, that there is a generational gap or generational difference in looking at the importance of why we even share our story.
Yeah, right.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah, so the number that I have, this comes from a Barna study and a Ligonier study, so it comes from 2 different places, but basically the line is this. Almost half, 47% of millennial Christians, of which you are one. So once again, Drew becomes the face of an entire demographic.
Well, I'm actually right on the cusp.
Really?
So
from being
I am both Gen Z and millennial.
So are you a zillennial?
I guess. I mean, 97,
give us the data. Come on, data. We love data here at New Life. I don't know if you know that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in the chat, look it up for me. Drop it in a comment. You know?
Please.
I think I am right on the cusp.
If there is any correction that needs to be done, now's your chance. it. Some of you have been waiting for a chance to fact check us. And Drew's setting you up wonderfully.
I have not been able to really like fully identify in one because I'm like right there in Gen Z millennial. I would say I probably resonate a little bit more with the millennial, but I'm both.
What is that? What is it? When you say you resonate with them, what about you screams millennial?
My humor.
Really?
My humor.
Really?
Humor. There's a big difference between millennial and Gen Z humor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So
could I explain that to you? No, I don't think I could.
So because Drew is this is your second or third?
This is my second time on the pod.
Second time on the pod. Drew is legitimately one of the funniest people I know. I have to say that. But it is the strangest sense of humor you'll ever see.
Yes.
For example, I know I can crack Drew up right now just by going, boom.
Okay. Well, and here's the thing is like,
there it is.
I do think there's a little bit of individualism when it comes to my humor, like what just makes me laugh. But I know that I'm not alone because the videos on YouTube that make me laugh have millions of views.
Right.
I
Yeah,
may
but
be
those
half
are
a million.
just your views of them.
No, I may be 500,000, but 3 million, like yes, that sound.
What is that you can share with our listeners and our viewers?
Yes.
Understanding. What is the funniest video, your favorite funny video on YouTube?
Yeah.
Or TikTok or whatever?
So all my coworkers know this, but there is a trend on YouTube where it is a video of simply silence broken up by random sounds at different intervals. So
and it's like 30, 45 minutes of silence.
Oh yeah.
It's not
it's
2 or 3
super
minutes.
sporadic. There's no formula on
So
how
it'll be
to
like a
build these.
3-hour video.
Yes, and it could be 45 minutes in until you hear the first sound. But people will take pop references, they'll take movie references, they'll take sounds from video games, and they'll intersperse that throughout the video. So the one you just referenced,
right,
that is SpongeBob. Whenever SpongeBob's upset, that sound like womp plays. So somebody made an hour of silence broken up by Blomp. I love playing it in the background at work. It just throws people off.
So we've had meetings where you've forgotten that it was on.
Yes, and it plays in another.
And we'll be having a very serious meeting, and out of nowhere, Blomp will happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I'm not making this story up for the pod. This has actually happened.
Yes, this is just me testifying to the fact that I have a humor that resonates with the millennial crowd. Okay, all right. So all the millennials out there watching the pod, you might know about this.
Right.
You might know about
The wise mystical tree.
The wise mystical tree
is another one. Now, if you're not so I'm not a millennial. Yes. I am Gen X, and I am like 1973, right down the middle of Gen X. No one knows we exist. Everyone forgot about us. Latchkey kids. I wasn't. My parents are great.
What's a latchkey?
It's when your parents were both working, so you'd come home and you had your key to your house around your neck, and so you had to let yourself in the house.
You would wear your key around your neck.
Yeah, much like in Skeleton Crew, the new Disney show about Star Wars. So anyway, but there is a difference. Now, growing up, so I grew up Pentecostal, evangelical. I mean, let's just do the breakdown. Christian, Protestant, evangelical, Pentecostal, Southern Holiness, all that kind of stuff. Witnessing was not just something like, oh, I shared my faith with my friend. It was, hey, we're going to go to the mall as a group on a Friday night and hand out tracts to people and witness to them.
Right.
So that's something we did. Like literally I had to do that. And I remember like going to the mall and what we called back then, I don't know what they're called now, but we would call them stoners back then. They were like the heavy metal kids. And they would like burn them in front of us and like go, and like, they're all all Eddies from Stranger Things. Like that would be, so imagine.
Still called stoners.
Yeah. So just imagine, right? Because I was more of like the Stranger kids.
Yeah.
Going to witness to the Eddie, right? That was it. So imagine that. Or Ralphie from Christmas Story going to witness to Eddie from Stranger Things. That's what you're having to deal with.
It's amazing to visualize that.
Yeah. So that's what I had to do. So I grew up very much like the idea of witnessing, like, hey, can I introduce you? You know, do you have a God-shaped hole in your heart? Let me introduce my best friend. His name is Jesus. That sort of thing. That just terrifies me.
Right.
I don't like to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm a doctor in this. I'm a professional one of these.
Yeah.
So what is interesting though is that going all the way back to what started this, 47% millennials or zillennials, whatever, believe it is actually wrong to share faith with the hope of conversion.
Yeah,
wrong. And the second half is interesting. Not wrong to share your faith story, okay, but with the hope of changing someone's mind, adjusting their worldview, as we talk about here on the podcast. And it's interesting to me because I think where we're at, so you may be listening, watching, however you're part of, thanks for joining us, but you may be in Austin, Texas, or St. Louis, or in Dublin, Ireland or whatever. And it may not be that big of a deal to talk about faith publicly. But here in the Pacific Northwest, in King County, the idea that you could look at someone and say, my faith is right, your faith is wrong, let me convince you of that, is shockingly inappropriate out here.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of factors that weigh into this conversation in terms of why it's affected our generation specifically. I think of different social issues. I think of political issues, economical issues. And one of the first things that came to mind as you were just talking about the whole mall incident, I immediately thought of people at baseball stadiums or large football games that are outside holding picket signs.
Right.
I think there's been a picture based on this idea of a very eccentric, outspoken evangelism, and more
street
of it,
preachers,
street preaching,
street evangelism,
and almost in a derogatory way. Because at the same time, like I could go to these games and I get upset looking at people trying to bring people to Jesus in that fashion.
Because I think what's true, right? So there's me, junior high Brian, shaky hand, handing a tract to one of the kids he goes to school with, by the way, who he knows may stab him later or something like that. I don't know. I was really scared of the kid, but it turns out he's totally normal. But, that sort of thing versus, okay, so there's that, which to me, that's witnessing.
Right.
But for a whole other generation, no, witnessing is standing up with these signs that say God hates you, you're a murderer, you're a harlot, you're evil, the kind of the turn or burn type signage.
Exactly.
And what I call witnessing, I'm uncomfortable with, but yet what a whole other generation says, no, I'm not uncomfortable, that's legitimately offensive.
Yeah, and I think that a burden that I have experienced just growing up is this idea of even having the right to be in relationship with these people with the ability to even bring up the possibility of bringing someone to Christ. And that sounds silly to say because it's like, man, I need to earn the right to bring this person over to Christ. But that is, I think, a large part of my generation's obstacle we're navigating is how do I even become a part of this person's story so that they trust me enough to even have that? Because I mean, it's one thing for you to go up and hand someone a slip of paper, not even really knowing them, but having enough bravery to do so. I think I definitely have felt oftentimes when I'm walking up to someone like, man, I need to dedicate 6 months to a year before I even spark this conversation about this. And maybe that's just relational built dynamics that are part of my decade or my
because that generational value versus Gen X where we don't really like anyone.
Do you just don't care?
No, we don't care. We're pretty much just so down on ourselves.
Yeah.
You got to remember the anthem of our generation comes from Smashing Pumpkins, which is despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage.
Wow.
Yeah.
That'll preach.
Yeah. So, well, that was really depressing. So anyway, but hey, I'm still alive, Pearl Jam. So I think one other thing too is, so as I was focusing on this issue, like why don't we, and there's a lot of ways we can address this. Sometimes we like to start each episode with a question or anything, but the idea of why don't we witness or why should we share our faith? But for me, believe it or not, it all goes down to a Seinfeld episode, if I may.
I would love to.
So there's an episode of Seinfeld where Elaine, his friend Elaine, and her boyfriend Putty, beautifully portrayed by Patrick Warburton, by the way, they are deciding whether or not they're going to go out to eat.
Yeah.
And she says, hey, where do you want to go eat? And Putty says, feels like an Arby's night. And they start talking and she says, does it bother you that I'm not religious? And he said, no, I don't care. He goes, why doesn't it bother you that I'm not religious? And Putty's answer is, because I'm not the one going to hell. Wow. And then Elaine says something that, believe it or not, has deeply imprinted into my brain. Yeah. And I think it's actually, believe it or not, at the core of this discussion. Elaine's response is, if you believe I'm going to hell, you should care that I'm going to hell.
Wow.
If you believe that I'm going to hell, you should care that I'm going to hell. And I wonder if our lack of motivation to simply share faith, and we'll talk about what that looks like and how to do it and all that in a second, but I want to kind of get at this heart of it. Do we really believe there is a negative outcome for people who don't follow Jesus eternally?
Yeah. Do we, like you're asking the question.
Is there a hell coming?
Yes. Do we actually believe that?
Right.
Yeah.
Because we don't preach it a whole lot. We don't, we talk a lot of times when we talk about Jesus and our salvation, it's more the salvation and the up and the improving our life and giving us hope for our now and that kind of stuff. But the idea that there is this dark consequence for not following Jesus.
Right.
And I wonder if the downplay of that conversation has then generationally led to the delusion of what early Pentecostals called the missional imperative, this idea that we have to tell people about Jesus, that if we believe they're going to hell, we should care.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Troy shared a story, I think it was last week or the week before, about getting into a car with an Uber driver. Uber driver already has this perspective he has on Pastor Troy once Pastor Troy introduces himself as a pastor. And I think it's a great example of like, there's this sense of judgment that we're already walking into. Like I said, sometimes it's like we impose ourselves with those turn or burn type evangelism, or even we hear all these negative stories of pastors and things like that. We're kind of like this timid person in the corner saying, hey, like, we're not all bad ourselves, you know? Like, we're not all like this. Like, can I just have the chance to have this conversation with you? And I think that's real. That's super real. Like, there's lots of times where if you step outside of a church environment and step into a conversation with somebody who maybe has no church experience, the only perspective they have are the things they're reading on news articles or headlines. And you're trying to step into a conversation and say, oh, this is your understanding of everything, but let me just try to have a conversation with you. No, I'm not going to let these barriers down at all. But I do think that's important to think about is I think there's a lot of judgment and there's a lot of opinions that we are kind of putting on our backs as we walk into a lot of these conversations about sharing our story.
I think so. And what I think my invitation for all of us to be is to let that heart of, if I believe that there is the possibility of eternity without the love of God or without relationship with God, I should be driven by that more than anything.
Yeah. Maybe
by that burden. Not a fear or whatever, but at least the burden of it.
Right.
That if I really believe that, it should now inform the way that I talk about Jesus with people.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, I think then it's like, well, what is, because I do get this a lot, how do I talk to my friends and family about Jesus? I'm not a doctor of theology, Brian, like you. I'm not a credentialed minister. I'm not a pro at this. I met a guy the other day here at New Life who has retired from his entire career. He's done with his career. He was an insurance executive or something like that, and he's about to go get his master's and then doctorate, or at least his master's. I don't want to overtell his story, but he's going to get his master's in apologetics because he's just fascinated with it.
Very cool.
And he's a fan of the podcast, and so, but I don't. Let's say I'm not,
I don't have that.
I'm not Cliff from TikTok. I can never say his last name. I'm not that guy, or I'm not. Yeah, I'm not one of these guys that can watch the video and says, watch this evangelical teen own this atheist. I don't have that. I'm just a guy. I'm just sitting in my car. I do believe in Jesus and I love what God's done for my life. How am I just supposed to have a normal, like, how do I do this? So I'm going to kind of take almost an outlining kind of way of looking at it, but I think part of it is sharing the paradigm about the word witness. Is actually starting there. Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Jesus says, you will receive power and be my witnesses. Okay. And so it starts by saying, well, what is a witness? What does it mean, like, to be a witness? And I think if I can just get my mind into that actually will start to free me. Kierkegaard says that we should all aim to be witnesses, not teachers. And although don't get that confused with the spiritual gift of teaching and all that kind of stuff. But what did he mean by that? When Kierkegaard talks about being witnesses instead of teachers, what he's saying is that more often than not, the approach is, I'm an expert, let me educate you. That's what a teacher does. A witness simply says, this is what I've seen, heard, and experienced. Let me share it with you. So right now, I just want to start saying, don't worry about teaching people things. Don't worry about convincing people of things. Don't worry about persuading people of things. I think it would be, let's just start with sharing what you have seen, heard, or experienced.
So let me ask you this. Should there be a sense of burden or power that builds up this confidence prior to going into those kind of conversations of sharing your story. I've heard Acts 1:8, you will receive power. I think the word for that power there is dunamis.
Yeah,
I've
so
heard,
it's ability.
Yeah, it's ability.
It's
It's like
ability.
dynamite.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of empowerment that happens when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. But you're saying, don't worry about these different hurdles, but instead, like, just walk forward with that confidence. But the burden and the power that we feel there, like, how should we navigate? I guess the question I'm trying to think through is there a level of entitlement we should feel? Is there a level of confidence we should feel walking into that already, knowing like, okay, God has done this in my life, regardless of the outcome that I have when I share these stories with people or share my story with someone? Speak to that a little bit.
Well, I think it's interesting because you're talking about confidence and entitlement, and I think that's actually the wrong way to be driven.
Really? Yeah.
I think it's burden.
Yeah.
I think I need to have a burden and a desire, not even an obligation. The way that when Jeremiah was given a prophecy, and I don't remember the passage off the top of my head, but in Jeremiah, he's given a prophecy, and he said it felt like it was a fire shut inside of his bones that was exploding to get out. That this idea of, if I have been given this, why would I not share it? Why would I not? I'm not going to put you on the spot. You just got a new car. We won't get into the brand or anything like that. And you love that car.
I love it.
And you have been sharing the experience of the joy of having that new car, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you kind of won't shut up about it. I didn't want to get this weird or be public. But not only that, one of your dear friends is now seriously considering also getting that same car. Yeah. Whereas before, he had no interest in that car, right? None at all. Only weirdos drive that kind of car. Okay?
Great
job.
But
because of your what?
My excitement.
Your excitement, your love.
Yeah, my burden for
joy,
communicating the value behind something.
And to completely oversell it.
I'm just getting
the car has changed your life.
Wow.
And so what do you want to do? You have shared that experience of that car with a friend because you would like to see it change his life too.
That's actually a great example.
Right? Or let's go again.
He's ready.
Another thing about Drew you may not know, Drew is a fabulous musician.
Thank you.
Drew makes music. You love music.
I do love music.
And there are certain bands that you love.
I do.
And then what happens when you discover a band that affects you?
It does.
You share what it means. You don't defend it. You get offended if someone else doesn't like it, right? But you see what I'm saying? You don't defend it.
Right.
It comes from a place of this. Let me bear witness to what this thing has done.
That's
and I'm going now share it with you. You do it out of the joy of your own experience, not out of the fear.
Wow.
And you don't want someone else to miss out.
Yeah.
Your fear is that they'll miss out. So let's scale that up to not a great car or a great band or a great restaurant or a great movie.
Yep.
Right? Let's scale that all the way up to eternity.
Wow.
I don't want you to miss out. I'm not scared of you going to hell and being punished, although I should have that fear somewhere. I just simply don't want you to miss out on what I believe I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
That's bearing witness. Let me simply share with you what I've seen, heard, and experienced instead of convincing you.
That's good. And I think I love that idea of this overflow of excitement and this joy to share that story. But then there still is that part that's like, where do you introduce the eternal impact in the eternity? Because I've been involved in our young adult ministry for a long time. I've shared my story multiple times. It creates a level of like excitement and wow, like it's great to see God working in your life in this way. It's all different for us, but we can navigate it together. But at the end of the day, I'm not ending my conversation saying, repent and believe the gospel or you're going to hell today. There's a lot of times where I'm not ending my conversations in that way. So speak to that, like, okay, we carry this burden. We have this sense of calling to share our story, but where do you introduce that? Where do you start to like have those conversations of, okay, now let's actually look at what happens if we don't make that decision?
Yeah.
Is that like, should we feel that responsibility to, speak to that right away or build that relationship, let God work in that,
Well, let's look. I think because if you look at the mission itself, what are we actually called to do? I think that's a great place to start. Okay, so Matthew 28, you just hit it, Matthew 28. By the way, another statistic came out of that study is that 51% of Christians don't know what the Great Commission is.
Go into all the world and make disciples of all
nations. So the Great
nations.
Commission is Matthew 28, 18, go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. That's a Great Commission. But the first fact that people don't know that is the Great Commission or that's even a command.
Yeah.
And we've done this before on the show, but I'll go into it again. When you look at how the Greek is laid out, there's one command in that sentence. It sounds like there's a bunch of commands, but there's only one actual verb that's a command. Everything else is a passive action.
Yeah.
So another way to look at that verse is in your going.
Yeah.
So the going is assumed. So in your going.
In your everyday.
The command is disciple. Disciple. That's it. Disciple people.
Yeah.
Of everyone you come into contact with, disciple them. So even that moment of saying, well, when do I introduce the turn or burn moment? When do I seal the deal? When do I get them to sign on the line? And that's the other issue, I think, with a lot of modern evangelistic techniques is it's driving to the decision.
Yeah.
It's driving to the decision. Whereas Jesus says, as you come and go with each other, disciple everyone you come into contact with.
Right.
And how do I disciple people? I bear witness. I share what I know and have experienced about Jesus. So the key act of discipleship is sharing what you personally know or believe about Jesus. Not all the particulars or all the nuances or theological or whatever, but to simply say, this is what I know, believe, and have experienced, my ideas, feelings, and values about Jesus. I'm not sharing in the sense of I'm not sharing a philosophy with you. I'm not sharing a recipe with you. I am just simply sharing this person with you and what this person means to me. And that is really, I think, sort of the theme or the big takeaway from this would be is that's in the story.
Yeah.
The sharing of the story, because our stories are really the truth of the gospel brought to life, right? So I can say to someone, hey, Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead. And if you don't believe that, you're going to spend eternity separated from God.
Right.
Okay. I can. That is a true statement. At least in my worldview, that's an absolutely true statement. Or I can say, I was lost, and Jesus found me, took care of my guilt and my shame when I submitted to him. That's my story. And I have hope, not only in the next life, but in the here and now, by the way.
Yeah.
I have hope. I have perseverance. I have freedom from guilt, shame. I have freedom from a fear of death. All of these things. Why? Oh, because because of Jesus I believe in, not because I believe in Jesus.
Yeah, that's an important one. I think Troy says text, timing, and tone. Is that what it is? That's a super key thing to think about when you're having these conversations. Especially the tone that you just had there. Somebody could step up on a stage, step up on a platform, have a conversation and say exactly what you said with a different tone and it would go a certain direction. So, yeah.
And that's where I think the idea of relationship comes in. Now, I'm not the one, there's a couple of misnomers about this that I sort of reject on premise. One is I have to have a relationship with someone to share my Jesus story with them. Well, relationship could be, you mentioned Troy in the Uber or conversations I have with people, whatever. I had a conversation, a guy came into my office asking me some questions a few weeks ago, right? Before that, I'd never had a relationship with him. Yeah. But I had been invited into a conversation. So it's not like, oh, hey, I haven't known this guy for 6 months or a year. I shouldn't say these things to him. No, if the invitation is there, then there's that. The other one is that, well, I witness with my behavior or I witness with my lifestyle, but I never actually, it's the old thing, witness at all times and if absolutely necessary, use words. Like I'm a silent witness. I actually, at some point, you got to say it out loud. Right. You can't just be, because at that point, they'll think you're just a moral person.
Correct, yeah.
And they'll actually be paying more attention to you than to Jesus. So those are two that I sort of
those are really good,
just chuck out. But if you look at what Jesus is saying, he's saying the mission of my church is to engage people, be a part of the lives and the world of the people around you, and share what God has done in your life with them. That's how you disciple people. But that's not a moment. That is a ongoing series of conversations, of never-ending conversations, where you are, again, go back to one of the other metaphors for sharing faith is planting seed. Jesus uses it in Mark, Paul uses it in 1 Corinthians. I've planted seed in someone's life. I may not be the one that harvests it. Right. But in every conversation I have with you, am I cultivating Or am I undermining the work of God in your life?
It's good. Yeah.
So if I'm sharing faith with you, am I discipling you? And again, by disciple, I just mean I'm just sharing what I know, believe, and experience about Jesus, right? I'm sharing that with you. Then am I cultivating that or am I undermining it in that conversation?
That's really good.
And that conversation goes to you, who's a coworker at church with me. Am I discipling you or am I subverting Christ's discipleship in you?
Yeah.
All the way to the complete stranger.
Right.
Am I planting seed or am I subverting the work of Christ in that person's relationship? Not just because I stand up and say, you have a God-shaped hole in your heart. Let me introduce you to my best friend. His name is Jesus.
Yeah.
But because I am saying, Jesus has so affected my life, and this is why, this is how, this is who. So
yeah, no, I'm gathering my thoughts here. I think there's, obviously I've talked a lot about this idea of individualism in my generation, like how do we best empower ourselves? I think that sadly enough, that's become the reality for a lot of people and believers specifically is how do we just work on ourselves when it comes to Jesus? How do we just better our relationship with Jesus? And we don't take a step back and realize that the burden and the mission that we all have been empowered to do so. And sometimes some of us feel like, man, like I do have to be like Pastor Brian. I do have to be like that guy who goes and preaches at the schools before I even have the chance to do that. But what we're saying here is that we have already received that power. If we invite the Holy Spirit into us, that alone is enough for us to start carrying out the Great Commission.
yeah. I mean, if you look in the Bible, Jesus oftentimes, sometimes he says, don't tell anybody.
Right.
But there are many times where he changes somebody's life and then he immediately says, now go. He doesn't stop them in that moment. He doesn't say, okay, now you need to go get in a Bible, because what am I sharing? I'm just sharing
what God's done already.
What God's already done. We look at the woman, and we'll go through them, but the woman at the well in Samaria, come and see a man who's told me everything I've ever done.
Yeah.
That was her witness. That was her event. Just come and see.
Yep.
Come and see a man who's told me everything I've ever done.
Right.
The man born blind in John 9, whether he's a demon or not, I don't know. All I know is once I was blind, now I can see.
Yep.
All they're doing are sharing in their witness. They are bearing witness, right, to what they, even in their initial experience of that, without the nuance, without unpacking it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They're not caught up or broken down by the overwhelming burden of theological nuance and even in 21st century. Well, what about politics and what about science and what about faith and what about all? They're just saying, look, I those may be issues for you or those may be questions. All I can share is my ideas, my feelings, my values. I can only share what I've experienced with you.
Right.
And here it is. Colossians, though, says, in Colossians 4, for example, verse 5, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity.
Yeah.
There's a great way to look at it. Just be wise.
Yeah.
Be wise. And if you have an opportunity, you can take it, but not seize it.
Right.
Just take it. Let your conversation, how can I live that way? You said, how can I be aware of it? Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone.
Right.
Okay, so I can start right now by being aware, by being wise, making the most, and then making sure at least my conversations are full of grace. And I can begin at least to move the needle, to use another kind of metaphor, to move the needle in people's lives.
Right.
Not be so obsessed with closing the deal, always be closing, but to just say, am I moving the needle? Am I moving the needle?
Yeah, I love that idea of moving the needle. I think it's such a simple phrase, but I think of that even with working out. Like we talk about this idea of like, regardless of the progress you're making there, like how are you taking what you already know and just expanding on it a little bit more? And I think going back to kind of this idea of like being equipped to testify, not having to have all the knowledge or go to seminary to be able to share these things, but just actually taking a second and looking back on the things in which God has already been faithful to you. My wife and I have started to do this every day. We write down 2 things that God has blessed us with or been faithful in. And it's a simple reminder, but I think that alone, maybe like speak to that if somebody's sitting in their car right now and they're just like, what do I have to share if I feel like I haven't even given my life to Christ? Like where do I start there? After, like, where do I start to direct my thoughts and thinking of the blessings, but also thinking about what do I even have to share if I don't know Jesus?
Yeah, well, if you don't know Jesus, you don't have a lot to share, honestly. I mean, I'll put it right there. You shouldn't bear witness to something you've never experienced.
Right.
That's false testimony, honestly.
Yeah.
But even if you've experienced Jesus and you've never really been discipled, or you don't feel like you have a lot, you do know who you were before. Mm-hmm. You do know how you came to make your decision about Jesus, and you do know what your life has been like after. Yeah. That's what you know. So you can just start sharing that. And you know a lot more about Jesus than you think you already do, by the way, because you know how he's telling you to act. You know how he's telling you to behave. Because even if you're not well discipled in terms of how many horned beasts are coming out of the sea, or how, what the secret unlocked code to Isaiah 56 is, or, I don't know any of that. Yeah, but you know who you were, how you met him, and what he's done. Yeah. That you know. And that's yours. Yeah. That is the gospel coming to truth in your life. Mm. And the people you know probably know that about you too.
Right.
So you can say, at the very least, come and see a man who changed me, who gave me freedom from guilt, freedom from fear, freedom from shame. So So I was raised by, you're raised by Christian parents. I was raised by Christian parents. Your parents are ministers, mine are not. Mine are lay people, just great church folk, okay? Right. I was raised in a godly home. I went to church every Sunday. I went to a lot of extra church. I have extra credit church. I just have it all, right? Bible, all that kind. I went to all that kind of stuff. First off, I have to challenge the very premise of the idea. There's no such thing as a boring testimony, right? Number one, there's no such thing as a boring testimony. What God has done in each and every one of our lives is incalculably miraculous.
Right.
Jesus, we are all, right? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Right.
Okay? All you're doing now is a matter of scale. Mm-hmm. Okay? Secondly, the assumption that I can raise my kids right and they won't make their own decisions later is a burden that no parent should shackle themselves with.
Wow.
Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah.
Your kids are going to do whatever the snot they want to do. Yeah, they're going to live their own lives, and you're going to put such a burden on them and on yourself to get it right. That is about as close to a works-based gospel as you can get. Yeah. If I get it right, my kids will be blessed.
Right.
Your kids will be blessed because of Jesus.
Yeah.
So what do I need to do? Absolutely, you need to raise them. You need to raise them bearing witness to who Jesus is to you, what he's called you to do, what he means to you. Yeah. If you keep telling your kids you can't do that because we're Christians, then all of a sudden Jesus becomes a cop, essentially, or a rule, a law bringer, which he is.
Yeah.
But if you say, hopefully if you share, yes, we don't do these things because we're Christians, and I was raised that way, but it was also, we love Jesus. Look what Jesus has done. This is what Jesus means to me. This is who Jesus is to me.
Yeah.
I would say that. But I think, so I grew up, quote unquote, with a boring testimony. And until I gave my life to Jesus, I was still going to the same hell as the exciting testimonies were.
Yeah. And so
I don't know. That got me worked up.
No, that's awesome. I love that. I think I've just ran into a lot of conversations where you're sharing a part of your story and somebody says, oh, I just didn't have an exciting moment like that. And it actually acts as a hindrance for people.
Right.
It actually will be I did not have this kind of life transformational moment or this deep valley where God brought me out.
I'm going to go full Tim Keller here.
I love it.
Yeah.
But speak to that for the people who are like, I don't have a significant moment in my life to speak to my story is not powerful enough.
Yeah. Then I would say you don't really understand the gospel. You don't understand how desperately in sin you really were. Wow. Just because you're the prodigal brother, remember, the good brother was just as lost.
Yeah.
And the good brother didn't have an exciting testimony either. And he was just as separated from the father as the son who went out and squandered his wealth.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, if I'm saying that, because I've said that, I mean, I'll just be honest. Sure. I'm a church kid. I'm a church nerd kid.
Yep.
And one of the reasons I didn't have a life a wild life in high school. It's because no one invited me to do anything to be wild. So part of it was just because I never had the chance. Yeah. But so all that being said but I was still what the gospel reminds me is that I was still as lost. Mm-hmm. And what Jesus did in my life is no greater, nor is it any lesser than what he did in like my friends who were alcoholics and drug addicts, and he radically saved them. Mm-hmm. And I could sit there and say, I don't have a story like X. Well, I don't have a story. I don't have a testimony like Y. I don't have anything to share. That's just simply not true. If I'm saying that, I'm denying what Jesus did for me on the cross. Yeah. Jesus still died for me in the same way.
Yeah.
And so I just have to reject the premise of that, like on its face, the immediate rejection of that idea. And now I have to understand, what did Jesus really do for me? Mm. I was lost in sin.
Right.
Now, do I have a long list? Yeah, but my list wasn't as public and as open, by the way also.
Yeah.
Do I still have scars and struggles and all that kind of stuff from that sin? Absolutely. Yeah. So does it really matter? Mm-hmm. And if I say, man, I don't have a wild testimony like you do, Drew. I don't know if Drew has a wild testimony. He's the one on camera. But then what I'm saying is wow, what Jesus did for me isn't as great as what he did for you.
Right.
And what a horrible way to take it.
Yeah, I mean,
I just can you imagine being
goes
Jesus
down this nasty road of comparison.
Yeah, which is not the gospel. No. So I would say that, and I would think that what I'm here to do is to, again, just bear witness for what he's done for me.
Yeah.
And if you say, well, I don't know what Jesus has done for me, man, that's your work. Then get to work. Get to know Jesus. Mm-hmm. If you're a Christian saying, I don't really understand what Jesus did for me, then I would really encourage you to take that as a moment of study and meditation and prayer.
Right.
And invite Jesus to share what he did for you. Mm-hmm. You know, I was really obsessed with, I think in the first season when I Survey the Wondrous Cross, I kept bringing it up, and I was wanting to do it and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, go back to that.
Yeah.
When I survey the Wondrous Cross, right? And then you'll see that it demands my heart, my life, my all. Like it's just, I would have to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of stepping back to the millennial idea, we as millennials, we balance accept. We really have a burden for acceptance and empathy. How would you speak to that when if we balance these values with the Great Commission to go make all disciples? Where do those two fit together?
Yeah, and so I think where it comes from is that idea of the value, right? So if the mission is to disciple people, the strategy that God makes very clear in how he wants people discipled is through proclamation. So the verse is telling people about Jesus. So when I say proclamation, that's just a big Bible fancy way of me saying telling people about Jesus, okay? Yeah. So the verse that drives this podcast and drives a lot of us, but it really is the heart of this podcast, is Romans 10:14. How can they call on one that they haven't believed in? Mm-hmm. How can they believe in one whom they've not heard? Yeah. And how can they hear unless someone is proclaiming to them, is preaching to them, is sharing with them?
Right.
So it's basic logic. Mm-hmm. Anyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. We believe that. But how can they call on a name that they don't believe in? Yeah. How can they believe in him if they've never heard of him? And how can they hear about him if no one ever tells them?
Yeah.
So that's your job.
Yep.
Tell people. Where does love and empathy? Those are the values.
Yeah.
If you look at the Bible, those are the values. We are not driven by pride. We're not driven by outrage. We're not driven by disgust. We're not driven by contempt, which a lot of the negative views of evangelism seem to be driven by pride, disgust, outrage, contempt, arrogance.
I think sometimes people just feel like they're going to be pushy or intolerant towards people too.
But if you look at what the Bible says, we are driven by love.
Exactly, yeah.
It's our North Star. So I can say, if I'm not doing this from a place of love, I'm already off track.
Right.
If my sharing of faith comes from a place of hate or disgust or outrage or offense or self-entitlement or whatever, smugness or whatever, I'm already off course.
Yep, absolutely.
But if I make love sort of the North Star, that keeps me on track. And then love then drives me towards things like empathy.
Yeah, it's good.
Wondering, what must it like to be you? That's the heart of empathy.
Yeah.
What must it be like to be you?
Wow.
To have the life you've lived. Acceptance, and again, acceptance is we can choose a lot of words, tolerance, acceptance, inclusion, whatever, but just saying you're a human being that God made. Compassion, confidence is a part of it. Be resolved that you believe what you believe and be okay with it.
Right. Right.
It's okay to believe what you believe. Patience. That's the long game.
Oh, yeah.
That's the planting seed and cultivating.
Mm-hmm.
And sticking and staying in people's life. If you're going to introduce Jesus to them, be willing to stay in their life till Jesus is fully cultivated. Humility and awareness. Just being aware.
Yeah.
Just being aware. I have it as one of our tools. I don't know if we'll have a chance to get to them, but one of the tools that we use in sharing faith, just noticing. Noticing. Getting out of your own world, your own bubble, your own echo chamber, your own problems.
Absolutely.
Your own. I mean, we love self now, self-care, self-help, self-awareness. You know, we love self, but we are not driven by self. We're driven by Jesus, and we're driven by love. And the second I say I'm driven by love, that means I am automatically driven by others.
Yeah.
I am aware of others. Just become aware of other people.
Yeah, and make that a little bit more practical. Like you hear people, maybe somebody's heavily involved in their church, serving on Sundays, serving midweek. Talk about the idea of getting behind or around people who are not believers. It actually wakes you up. It actually stirs some. Even when I go visit other churches, if I have a Sunday off, like even being in different environments, it does something to you.
Yeah.
So like. So maybe somebody works in the corporate world and they're like, I'm surrounded by that every single day. Maybe that awareness is different for someone who works at a church.
Right. Yeah. So for me, I'm pretty sure most of the people at my job are Christians.
Let's hope so.
No, they are. Yeah. So, and I hear oftentimes people say, I wish I had a workplace that's full of Christians. I work at a Christian workplace.
Right.
That stuff. And I understand and I'm empathetic to that idea, but we are called to go among. We are called to live lives that are seen by other people. I mean, again, Paul in Colossians 4, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. He's assuming there are outsiders, and when we say outside, we mean outside the kingdom at that point. There are outsiders in your life. So if you've managed to create a life that's completely insulated from outsiders, you're actually incapable now of obeying some of the commands of Jesus.
Right.
You have to have people in your life that simply don't know Jesus. You do, or else you're not living life on mission at least.
Yeah.
So whatever that means, whatever that looks like, and then be aware of them. Be aware of them. So if it's, you're right. I work at a church or I volunteer at church, every waking moment spent at church, but I do go to the gym. Start being aware. I do, there's my favorite bookstore. Be aware.
Yeah.
I have, what about your neighbor? What about, your neighbor, what about 2 houses down, 3 houses? Just open your eyes. Jesus says that in John 4. Open your eyes.
Yeah.
Look at the world. It's ready. It's ripe. It's ready to go.
Yeah.
Are you going to be one of the workers that gets involved? So noticing is huge. There's a great book called The 9 Arts of Spiritual Conversation. We'll put a link in the show links to it that help with this kind of idea. But be aware, pray, pray for opportunity and pray for people. And by the way, when I say pray for people, pray for specific people specifically. Don't just, Lord, I pray for the lost. Say, Lord, I pray for my boss, Carl, who is going through cancer. Like pray specifically for specific people. Listen to people. This is kind of, it's my podcast, so I'm really horrible at this, but listen to people. Listen to what they're actually saying. Listen to the questions they're really asking. If you go back to our politics show, remember you're rarely talking about what you're actually talking about.
True.
So listen to people.
Yeah, it's good. I just had this note prior to coming in. It was just this idea of like creating spaces where you can feel equipped and confident to share those things. Sometimes people just aren't getting out enough to be around people who just need to hear it, like you were just saying.
Right.
I won't say his name, but I have an amazing neighbor, typical HOA guy, just wants to follow all the rules. I make a habit out of my every Friday to go out and take care of my lawn because I know I'm often going to run into this gentleman. And the first conversation I had with him was, hey, like, what do you do? Told him I'm a pastor, and you could tell things shifted at that moment.
Yeah.
There was very much a demeanor that changed. There's very much I would even say a little bit of a distaste there. And it created a sense of being just uncomfortable. But in those moments, it takes creating that space consistently that allows me to even plant that seed. You know, I step out there and I get asked to join the HOA committee all the time because, we need people with more discernment and more people who would actually help follow the rule. And I'm like, that's just not my thing. It's putting myself out there to like, just even have conversation with him that allows me to share my story a little bit piece by piece by piece. And sometimes maybe you're listening, you just need to be encouraged, like create those spaces in your day-to-day life. Maybe it's like going out to like a local bookstore. Maybe it's going out to something.
Being intentional about it. At some point, you're going to have to do it on purpose because if you don't do it on purpose, you'll rarely ever do it by accident. Yeah. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. The way that Jesus set it up is he's assuming there's an everyday coming and going in your life and that you are interacting with all nations.
There's an assumption there.
There's an assumption that you're out and doing things. Mm-hmm. Christianity was never meant to be locked in walls and isolated. And you got to remember, Christianity is meant to serve. Yeah. It's not meant necessarily to conquer. And what happens a lot of times is people say, Drew, you should join the HOH, and then we'll stack it with Christians, and then we'll have an all-Christian HOH, and then we'll be able to put up the nativity at Christmas, and then we'll be able to really do this. And no. If we serve in those things, we go in to serve. Yeah. I'm bringing the gospel not to win you. Right. I'm bringing you the gospel to serve you. Yeah. Jesus said,
to equip you.
I did not come to be served, but to serve. Mm-hmm. Jesus came, I came to seek and to save that who was lost.
That's great.
Right? So, there's a lot of theologies out there, Seven Mountain Theology. There's all kinds of stuff that says, well, if we win and we rule, then we'll do it. And I would maybe push back a little bit. That would say, no, we serve. I'm going to serve the PTA. I'm going to serve my kids' classroom. Yep. I'm going to serve my neighbors by sharing this incredible thing I have with them. Yeah. I'm not going to defeat them. Mm-hmm. I'm going to serve them.
It's good.
And that may challenge people. That may push. And we'll probably get some pushback on that particular comment because I know people, there is sort of a, well, what about the kingdom come? And okay, I'll concede there's a lot of nuance to that. I'm just encouraging people to say Jesus came. His kingdom is a kingdom that serves. Yeah. So we serve our communities, but we don't just do nice things for our communities. Yeah. We bring the gospel to our communities. That's what I'm saying.
No, for sure.
And when given the opportunity, then we are ready. 1 Peter, he tells his readers, be ready to give an account of the hope that you have in Jesus. Amen. With gentleness and meekness, by the way, not with anger and outrage, not with arrogance and pride and smugness, but with humility and meekness and gentleness, because you're not sharing what you've done. Yeah. You're not sharing how great you are. Yeah. You're sharing what Jesus has done. It's really good. That's why another tool that I think is important is curiosity versus outrage. I think we could go a lot better with curiosity than outrage. I think Christians would be well served by being more curious than outraged. Wow. Instead of saying, I can't believe it's this way, start asking people, why is it this way? Wow. I can't believe you would say that. Maybe ask, why would you say that?
That's great.
Right? So, people, like you said, there is a great moment of awkwardness that comes whenever you tell somebody you're a pastor. It just changes the whole mood. It's one of my favorite moments when I'm on a plane or I love it when I'm playing golf. I used to play golf, and you play golf with somebody, they just be swearing and and so what are you doing? Like, I'm a pastor. I'm like, oh, sorry, Father. I'm like, no, I'm not a priest. But there's that. But then if someone says, well, I can't believe, don't get outraged when they challenge your faith.
Don't try to defend it. Yeah.
You don't need to. Jesus doesn't need you to defend him.
Oh, absolutely.
But to be curious. Oh, I wonder why. Why do you feel that way? Why would you say that? That's not my experience with Jesus. Yeah. What has happened in your life? Where did you get that idea from? Oh, I heard Christians believe this. Oh, it's interesting. Christians actually, I don't believe that. Yeah. There's a lot of Christians who would disagree with that idea. I have this great podcast that I listen to called Theology Threads, or that's whatever. True. But to be curious more than outrage, because we've got plenty of outrage in culture. Culture's ready to be outraged. Yeah. I think where the church could really define itself as curious. Yeah. And if you look at Jesus, Jesus was incredibly curious.
Absolutely.
He would ask, why do you say that? Where is, what is going on here? What do you mean when you say, who do you say that I am?
Right.
His outrage was reserved for very specific people. And by the way, even in his outrage, he still died for those people too. So,
well, and last thing, but I would say even that curiosity helps cultivate this ability to share people's testimonies in a better and more cohesive way. I think putting the question back on someone allows them to speak out loud those things that they already believe in their heart. Classic, example of a neighbor moved into an apartment. This guy smoked a lot of weed, Pastor Brian.
Oh, wow.
And
it's legal here. So just in case you wonder why I didn't call the cops.
He offered it to me as I was moving in. I said, I'm a pastor, and everything changed in that moment. Oh, I actually drive for this transportation that helps with homeless people, and completely changed.
He wanted to celebrate his moral work.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so in that moment, I actually, now looking back, asked the question, what drove you to have the compassion for that, to do that as your job? And it opened up this conversation where he was allowed to just share, I have this burden and this is how I got there. So I think that curiosity opens up the ability for people to share.
And he was probably open to a lot of things.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's a different podcast.
I just had to share that because
No. Well, it's funny because I have these tools that I talk about curiosity, and then loving as action, not loving as attitude. But then welcoming.
Yeah, for sure.
Is my life welcoming? Is my physical home welcoming?
Yeah.
But more importantly, is my life welcoming?
Yeah, right.
Do I have a life that welcomes people into it?
Yeah.
And that's our big struggle here in the Pacific Northwest. We don't have welcoming lives. Yeah. Our lives are ours. Our time is ours. Yeah. We don't have people into a lot of people. It's not a big thing out here to be ultra hospitable, to have big dinner parties, no. So I get maybe your home being a welcoming spot. That may be a bridge too far, but is your life welcoming? Is it ready to receive people into it?
Amen.
And I think that's an interesting thing. So there's some practical stuff too. We always get, how? There's a lot of practical stuff, but really the best place to start is meditate on your story and get it down to what was it like before? How did Jesus come into my life? And what is it like now? If you can start there practically as an organized thought, you're on your way to bearing witness. So,
absolutely. That's great.
So,
I love it.
Well, there's a lot more stuff we can cover also in Did We Miss Anything? So don't forget to subscribe, join the channel, get those so you can join us over on the YouTube side of things for the Did We Miss Anything? And Drew, always a pleasure having you with us. Thanks for being here.
Always a blast being here.
All right. Hey, stay around and we'll see you next time.